Hey everyone, how's it going? Um, so I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you something that I'm working on right now. It's the most recent project. And then I'm going to take a step back and walk you through the stuff that I worked on in the past and kind of lead to where we are right now with the current project that I'm working on. So you can switch to the next slide and then hit play on this one, yeah. Okay, so this is photogrammetry environments, Unity, and videogrammetry on the actor. We're working with Metastage, and it's Occupied VR that did the compositing there. So that's where we are right now. We're trying to make a movie. It's called Hyperreal. That's a film that you like walk around as if you're inside the film. And I wanted to just like walk you through my time in 360 video to kind of like make you understand like how it's evolved to this place and how the concepts that we worked on there are still like being used in this new medium. So first, you can go to the next slide if you don't mind. So this is what we want Hyperreal to look like ultimately in the end. This is our cleaned up version of like how we're going to get the videogrammetry to work. So what you saw before was an uncleaned like raw test. This is the goal. This is the goal that we're going to be aiming for the next like probably 6 months. I come from like a traditional filmmaking background. I went to the American Film Institute. I'm from Canada originally, but I've lived in Los Angeles for like 10 years. And I love filmmaking. I've always loved filmmaking. And I kind of credit my love of film as to one of the reasons that I was able to do some stuff in 360 that other people were doing a version of, but I was really stealing from a lot of like my favorite films, the films I love. So I'm going to kind of walk you through that. So you can go to the next slide. Yeah, this one, yeah. So in early 360 narrative, I know the people that made these things. And I kind of use this as an example because POV is a really important thing that people were struggling with because they were very committed to making POV something that if it starts POV, it has to continue that way throughout, right? And so I've always felt that like feature films that tried to do that were not very successful all throughout. But there's some great subtle examples of POV in some very famous films, but they kind of intersperse it with little moments of seeing the character, and it seems obvious. Like even as I say it now, it seems obvious, but I kind of wanted to show you two really interesting clips. So you can go to the next slide. And you can hit play on this one. So this is a good example of POV in Goodfellas and in Fellini's 8½. So they're pretty direct examples of POV, but we're seeing what the characters are seeing. Like, and you know, Scorsese was literally stealing that shot from Fellini. So it's kind of just a way to demonstrate both of these movies are first-person POV movies in the sense that you feel like you're with these characters the entire time. They're meant to be subjective experiences, right? And so when I was adapting some of the stuff I was going to do in 360 video, I was thinking about, okay, let's not feel beholden to needing to be inside a character's eyes. Let's try and do something that feels subjective but kind of can break the rule that way. So I'll show you some examples from my own films here to show some direct POV contrasted with third person. You can go ahead and play it. Thank you. You can see that we got better at stitching as we went along. The first one had a lot of stitch problems. But the point of this is just like kind of just showing simply that you can transition between the direct POV and the third person. I think people are becoming aware of this, or have been for the last year. But in knowing that creates a problem because it creates an editing problem, right? And so basically, this is another thing that came from my time in film school, which is I love editing. I studied as a director and a writer to a certain extent, but I love editing. I've just always done it. And Walter Murch, famous editor of Godfather, tons of movies, has this theory of eye trace, and it says you should always be aware of where in the frame you want the audience to look and cut accordingly. So you're matching the movement from one side of the screen to the other for a transition, matching the frame, shape, or symbol. So when he was talking about this, he was talking about like a large screen, even larger than this, right? And he's talking about how if you have something over here and then you cut to something over there, it's going to be jarring, right? And that could be a good kind of jarring, but if you don't want it to be jarring, you want to keep things in the same hemisphere, like in the same section of the screen. So I'm going to show you how I applied that rule in 360 video, and people know this by now, but it's very simple. You can go ahead. Yeah. So you're following the lady, and as she's crossing the character, that's when you're making the cut.
It isn't enough to be pretty these days.
The next cut's going to happen in the same hemisphere, and this is a simple version of that. But it kind of became this thing where we were playing at first with the very simple version. It's like you're gonna like we've been saying throughout these presentations, you're going to follow the person in motion, right? And then it got more complicated from there because it's one thing to move from side to side, but then when you start having things move up and down and guiding the viewer to look from up to down, you have to plan all of a sudden 3 cuts and reorienting people to a normal level horizon and whatnot. So this is kind of like how we were working through solving these issues at the time. And another thing that I think is kind of like a little bit unique to me and the teams I've worked with is the notion of plate shot. So in everything that we did, we were lighting it. We had lights like a traditional film set, and we would find the section that was safe to put the lights, and we would do a plate shot and composite out all of that equipment. And then again, much like the editing thing, it got more complicated because then we started doing moving shots. So I'll show you some example of those where you can see everything black and white. You can hit play, yeah. Everything black and white is the original shot before we revised it. Okay, so again, as we solve problems, we're creating other problems, because when you start constructing things in this way, it means that at first you can be like, oh, we have to plan this, like we have to get pretty close on our planning here. But you soon realize that the whole thing's like a house of cards or dominoes, and it ends up being that you have to plan everything, right? So the last thing about the 360 video stuff that I wanted to talk about is video storyboards. So everything that we've made up until this point, we shot it a literal one-to-one version of the movie using usually me and whoever was willing to work for food to come out and plan the movie. So you can, we're going to show you right here. You can hit play on this one. Thank you. Again, everything black and white is the video storyboard.
And what do we do?
Hi. I'm Ben.
Well, we knew for a fact that it shouldn't be occupied. We had to clear that whole building. We only found one Iraqi civilian there, so we cleared him out. We had the cover of darkness. We could sneak in.
So the thing about that is that when I go back and look at those, it's kind of funny to me because, you know, I forgot that we had like planned everything exactly to a T, but it's also just important, and I like to remind myself, like, even though I've done like maybe 6 360 videos at this point, like I am wrong all the time unless I see it in the video storyboard. Like unless I've seen it and I'm like, this is gonna work, then I just assume that I could be wrong. Because it's happened so many times where when I tried something that was a bit risky, it became an issue. So I've kind of lived by the advice that we have to plan everything. And that's also because there's no accumulated knowledge when it comes to 360 video. I think that we take for granted that film and cinema grammar is something that we've been learning since we were watching any type of media, right? Like we know it because we see it, right? But when something's brand new, you can't have a shorthand with somebody and just say, oh, it's like this. It's like this type of shot because all of this is brand new. So now I'm going to just talk for a second about, this is now taking us into the section of what I've been doing for the last year. So everything that we've talked about before was like 360 video. So I was really bored waiting to make Hyperreal, the one that I'm making right now, and I wanted to make a movie that you could walk around in. And I kind of asked myself, like, if I had no money, which I didn't really for this thing, like, what would I do? Like, how would I make a movie you could walk around in? Because, you know, hyperreal, videogrammetry, photogram, which are all these things, had a big price tag attached to them. And so I just got really, really bored, and I started playing around. And I ended up making something that's an experiment. It's appropriately titled The Apartment Experiment. And it's crude in its animation, but it's like, it allowed me to understand the same concepts that I've talked about with 360 video in a new space. So now, before we were controlling looking up, right, like left, down, now it was about all of those things plus step forward, lean down, like look up, like lean over. So it was like, how can that work? So I'm gonna show you the trailer for this thing, and then I'll back up from that and we can talk about like how it was made.
Do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it now. Say it, say it, say it, say it, say it, say it, say it now.
someone outside. Oh, I'm not joking. There's someone there. You can't come in here. Hey, I will smash your fucking face. You okay? Who did this to you?
Listen. Listen. He found me.
I'm going to call the police to get you some help, okay?
No one can help. Don't you get it? No one can help.
Calm down.
You shouldn't be calm. You should be the exact opposite of calm.
Okay, so this is the last like 3 months. It took me about a month to make it, but just like thinking about the concept of it was a bit longer. So the first thing I needed to do was build my apartment, right? And I'm not really like a programmer, but when I discovered that you could build in VR by literally walking around and like touching the wall, I was able to like understand this. Like the whole coding aspect of like making a physics engine like that in Unity doesn't apply to me because I'm very like hands-on. So this is a kind of approximation of how the apartment experiment was built, like in VR. Oh yeah, you can play the video. So this kind of thing was really satisfying to me, to be able to just like be like, no, this isn't working because I just need to move it this way a tiny bit. Like I responded to that, and it gave me like the fuel to continue making the animations within it, because I was like, this is going to work. Like I didn't know it was going to work when I was trying it out, but like seeing those results really helped me, right? So I'll talk about animating it, and the animation's really, really crappy in it, right? But like, there's a reason, because it's me playing all the characters. You'll see, I'll show you right here. This is how it was animated, okay? It's like a very rudimentary form of motion capture. So like, this is the path that I walked, but I'll show you how I actually did the animation. I'll possess the character and assume their role. And you can see that right here. Now I'm going to walk inside the person's skin, and now I'm the person, which felt fun. And this applies not only to them, but it applies to the big red monster that you saw earlier. So you can change the world scale, and then I was able to destroy my own apartment as the big red monster. So all of this, when it came together, was really fun because it's like, you know, I learned only 3 weeks ago that I can play the monster live while someone else is assuming a role of the character within the experience. So that feeling of being able to like not tell them that they're interacting with me for real. So if they're hiding, I'm like, I know where you are and I can like find them, right? Like there's something fun about that. So takes us to Hyperreal, the one that we started this whole thing with. So this is us capturing the sets using photogrammetry in conjunction with eventually what will be videogrammetry actors. So this was only 2 weeks ago. This is the team from Occupied VR, production designer Justin, who's great. And just a tiny little bit about Hyperreal. So I really do believe that like VR has the potential to be a spiritual like medium in the sense that like it's kind of hard to, we never had a concept of what simulation theory was until we had VR. We never really had an idea that if there was something beyond this world, right, what would that feel like if we were being tricked? And I think VR has the potential to make people go, there could be something else, right? And that's what Hyperreal is about. It's about a character going through that journey. And she's a visual effects artist, and she becomes kind of obsessed with an assignment that she's working on. And what happens is she starts to see details in the real world that could only make sense if the real world was made in a computer program. So that's kind of the story. And the concept is to make something that is a sixed-off experience that's narrative, that takes all of these things that we've talked about up until this point and puts it in one package. And right now where I'm at is I'm at the stage where we're blocking, rehearsing in the actual environments that we've captured. So me and my team can be in the sets, these sets or other sets, and we can decide on audience placement all wearing our VR headsets. And using some of the rudimentary animation stuff that I showed you just a second ago, we can place the character there and see what it looks like to have them there versus over here. And what's more important to me is things like leaning down and how that works. So I'm going to show you something very new, which is the test that I've been doing for Hyperreal. That's the next slide. And you can just hit play on the next one. Ooh. There we go. This one, yeah. Great. Okay, so just like one more thing, and then I'll be done. Okay, so that stuff. First of all, if you put Philip Glass, the composer, to anything, it just like makes everything sound amazing. So that's just like just something I use him a lot. So there's something interesting to me about the idea of doing this thing for $0 while simultaneously making things that like have a regular budget. And as I'm seeing the budgets for videogrammetry and photogrammetry and comparing them to how 360 video was, I just want to say that like my independent filmmaking background always makes me think that like the advent of like the 16mm Bolex camera, that is the thing that allowed people like Brian De Palma and Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg to make movies, right? So they get like a $600 camera in 1962. It allows them to see how this feels to do this, right? Right now with videogrammetry, we're looking at like, some quotes are $10,000 a minute, right? So I'm just asking myself, like, would the Steven Spielberg or Brian De Palma of today pick up something that costs $10,000 a minute, right? And so it's more of just like an encouraging thing to think about the notion of where we're pricing these things at, and like how I think the true dream of VR makes things less expensive and makes people have the ability to have more control. And I kind of think that we should feel some passion for the idea of why those particular people felt that they could do it, because they could afford to do it. And the other thing, last thing here, is that like, you know, I kind of think that what independent filmmaking is associated with is like a bunch of people that like rent one room and make a movie in like a single room, or like a bunch of comedians get together and make a movie in like their friend's house, right? But like, independent filmmaking with this type of technology in the future doesn't have any limitation. Like some kid who's 13 could conceivably make something that looks like Star Wars or The Matrix by himself or herself with like 5 friends, right? And I kind of think that VR should start thinking, like the industry in general, if we start thinking that way, it's going to be better for everybody in the long run, if that's the goal in mind. It's democratizing, right? So that's it. That's the presentation. Thank you, guys.